Zik was the kind of man who turned heads wherever he went. Not just because of his wealth, but because of the aura he carried with him. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a sharply tailored wardrobe and a voice as smooth as aged whiskey. Zik was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing construction firms in Nigeria. From Ikoyi to Banana Island, his influence was stitched into every skyline. But beyond the business meetings and the red carpet galas, there was his home in Victoria Garden City, where his wife Saad reigned with grace, wisdom, and understated power. Saad was the embodiment of elegance. She didn't chase attention. Attention bowed to her. A former corporate lawyer turned philanthropist, she had exchanged courtrooms for community halls. Her name whispered with respect across Lagos. She managed their household like a queen who knew her kingdom well. And while she didn't flash diamonds or post selfies on Instagram, her presence commanded more admiration than all the influencers in Lekki combined. Yet, even a king can be tempted, and Zik, successful, admired, and doted on, was not immune to the whispering winds of temptation. Amaka came into Zik's life like glitter in a storm, bright, disruptive, and hard to ignore. A curvy, light-skinned 27-year-old with legs for days and a social media following that could make brands beg. She met Zik at an upscale real estate conference in Abuja. She knew how to play the game. Laughter that rang a second too long, touches that lingered, eyes that flickered with practiced mischief. She wasn't just beautiful, she was strategic. She saw Zik not as a man, but as a ladder. And the moment she realized he was married, something twisted in her mind. She wanted more than just his money. She wanted the home, the life, the ring. Amaka thought Saad was probably old, boring, and predictable. Some faded first lady hiding behind lace and gelly. She laughed to herself every time Zik spoke about my wife, in that soft, reverent tone. To her, a man like that could be turned. She only needed to apply pressure at the right points. So she turned up the charm, turned down the modesty, and stepped boldly into a war she didn't yet realize she had no weapons for. To Amaka, this was going to be a game of seduction. But Saad, the queen in the shadows, was not one to be overthrown so easily. Amaka might have thought she was hot, but she had not yet met fire. Amaka moved with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed her more than it had given. She wasn't raised with luxury, but she had made up her mind early in life. She wouldn't die in poverty like her mother, whose greatest sin was falling in love with a broke man. No, Amaka was smarter. She had studied human behavior, perfected her accent, learned how to pronounce her R's with a Western slant, and used her looks like currency. Zik was not the first rich man she'd encountered, but he was the first who offered both money and genuine emotional attention. He listened when she spoke, bought her silence in bundles of foreign trips and handbags, and laughed at her jokes like she was the most fascinating woman in the room. In Amaka's eyes, this was not just a fling, it was an investment. She began to picture herself in Sada's place, hosting fundraisers, being introduced as Mrs. Ifediba, and having her face on magazine covers not for modeling, but for marrying well. She was tired of hiding in hotel rooms and sneaking around on business trips. She wanted the marble floors, the gold-rimmed china, the dignified madam, nod from housemaids, and most of all, the legitimacy. So she escalated her tactics. She started asking subtle questions about Saad, fishing for flaws. "Does she nag a lot?" she'd ask with a pout, followed by a tender stroke down his chest. When that didn't yield much, she tried the sympathy card. "I just feel bad for you sometimes. You're so stressed, and you deserve someone who truly sees you." Zik would smile, half distracted, as if caught between fantasy and memory. Amaka took his silence for agreement. Then she started leaving little traces, her perfume in his car, a lipstick mark on his documents, a gold bracelet forgotten in his briefcase. These weren't accidents, they were messages. She was no longer content being a secret. She began posting ambiguous captions on social media. "Building empires with kings," he said, "I'm his piece. And real queens don't compete, they conquer." Her followers gushed, speculated, and envied her glow-up. But what they didn't know was that Amaka wasn't just chasing love. She was plotting a dethronement. She believed Saad was some aging relic Zik had outgrown. She imagined Zik's home as a hollow shell, waiting for a younger, hotter queen to breathe life into it. But what Amaka didn't understand was that Saad had built that home brick by emotional brick. And while Amaka was playing checkers in 6-inch heels, Saad had already mastered chess in bare feet. The game had only just begun, and Amaka was dancing on a battlefield she couldn't even see. Saad Ifediba was a woman whose silence could shift the energy of a room. She didn't need loud colors or dramatic entrances to make an impact. Her presence whispered elegance, and her wisdom rang louder than any scream. She had met Zik 15 years earlier, long before he became a powerhouse in Nigerian business circles. Back then, he was a sharp, ambitious man with nothing but borrowed shoes and blueprints full of hope. She had seen past his lack and chosen him for his potential, not his possessions. Through seasons of struggle, job rejections, missed meals, and the loneliness that came with building from scratch, Saad stood firmly by his side. She had left her legal career not out of weakness, but out of vision, Zik's vision. While he built the company, she built the family, the image, the reputation, and the networks that helped position him socially. When they finally made it to the top, Saad wore her sacrifices like invisible jewels. She never reminded Zik of them. She didn't need to. The mansion they now lived in, the respect he commanded, the staff that bowed when they saw him, it was all crafted in part by her silent sacrifices and unshakable loyalty. She was a woman who didn't compete because she already owned the throne. But Saad was not naive. She had seen the changes, the sudden late meetings, the guarded phone calls, the new cologne she hadn't bought. She noticed the way Zik's eyes wandered more often and how his mind seemed to drift like a kite in harmattan winds. She even spotted the pink bracelet in his car one day. A cheap thing, nothing like the timeless pieces she wore. Still, Saad said nothing. She had learned early that screaming and crying did little to reclaim a man's soul once it had started to wander. What she understood, and what Amaka never could, was that men don't cheat because their wives are lacking. Often, they cheat because they forget the value of gold while being distracted by shiny copper. So instead of reacting, Saad began to refine her silence. She increased her glow, not to win him back, but to remind herself of who she was. She rejoined charity boards, hosted private dinners with dignitaries, and enrolled in a short course on African development policy at Pan-Atlantic University. Zik watched in awe as his wife began to radiate a light that couldn't be dimmed, not even by the artificial sparkle of a mistress. Saad didn't beg. She didn't accuse. She simply elevated. Because queens don't fight concubines. They rule. And even Zik, blinded as he was by Amaka's youth and allure, began to feel the weight of what he stood to lose. Though he didn't yet know how heavy that loss could become. Zik tried to convince himself that everything was fine, that he could juggle two women without either falling apart. But even the strongest house develops cracks when termites start eating at the foundation. The mansion in Victoria Garden City that once echoed with laughter, candlelit dinners, and soft jazz on Sunday afternoons began to grow cold. It was subtle at first. Saad no longer asked where he had been when he came home late. She stopped waiting up for him. The meals still came out perfect, served hot and plated with care, but the warmth was missing. Her eyes met his across the dinner table with civility, not affection. And that silence, it was the kind that made him uncomfortable. Zik didn't like to admit it, but it stung. Deep down, he missed her attention. He missed the scent of her perfume blending with the smell of fried plantains on a Saturday morning. He missed the calm way she helped him navigate crises, how she used to gently rub his shoulders while he read through proposals. He had replaced that with Amaka's loud laughter, endless demands, and curated drama. And though Amaka brought excitement, she lacked something vital: depth. Conversations with her often felt like standing in a shallow pool. Entertaining but empty. Meanwhile, Amaka began to grow impatient. She was tired of hotels and whispered phone calls. She wanted visibility. She wanted possession. "Are you ever going to leave her?" she asked one evening, sprawled across silk sheets in a boutique suite in Lekki. Zik, already nursing a headache from a boardroom dispute, barely responded. "Baby, let's not spoil the moment," he murmured, avoiding her gaze. But Amaka wasn't in the mood for poetry. She had tasted the lifestyle and now wanted the throne. In her eyes, Saad was occupying a seat she didn't deserve. After all, wasn't it she who gave Zik youthful energy? Who reminded him he was still a desirable man? What did Saad offer except old memories and outdated love? Fueled by envy and desperation, Amaka began dropping heavier hints, introducing Zik to her friends as her man, planting subtle gossip among socialites, even suggesting they take a trip to Dubai together. But Zik hesitated, because while his ego loved Amaka's adoration, his spirit still clung to Saada's steadiness. The more Amaka pushed, the more the tension in his home grew. His children became withdrawn, Saad more radiant yet distant. And suddenly, Zik began to see his empire, not the concrete towers he'd built, but the home that had raised him, start to tilt. He was balancing on a tightrope, pulled between lust and legacy. And whether he admitted it or not, the cracks were beginning to show. Saad understood the nature of storms. Not every one needed to be fought with force. Some simply needed to be outlasted. While many women would have turned to confrontation or tears, Saad took a different path. She had learned from her mother and grandmothers that dignity was not weakness, and patience was not passivity. She knew that a man distracted by illusions needed to see the truth for himself, not be forced into it. So she began to withdraw in ways that mattered. She stopped checking in on Zik's whereabouts, no longer called to remind him to eat or texted to say goodnight. She stopped placing his favorite newspaper on the side table or setting out his clothes for the next day. These small, thoughtful gestures were replaced with distance. Not out of spite, but strategy. She focused on her personal growth, invested time in her mentorship programs for young girls, and began appearing more frequently at high-profile events alone, in stunning African prints that hugged her grace like royalty. The world outside noticed what Zik had started to overlook. Saad was not just a wife. She was a force. Zik's mother, Mama Ifediba, paid an unexpected visit one Wednesday afternoon. As Saad sat under the mango tree sipping zobo and reviewing charity reports, Mama had heard whispers. Wives always hear before husbands do. She looked at Saad, a woman she had once called my jewel, and asked only one question. "You go let one small pepper scatter your pot of soup?" Saad smiled gently. "Mama, I no day fight over soup. I be the kitchen." The old woman laughed, a deep belly sound, and nodded in approval. "Then keep cooking, my daughter. The pepper go burn itself." Encouraged, Saad fine-tuned her strategy. She began to re-engage Zik only when necessary. Polite, brief conversations that left him puzzled. When he walked into the living room, she was often on Zoom meetings with global donors, her name introduced with titles he had forgotten she once held. When they attended events together, she wore confidence like a designer bag, drawing stares and silent admiration from both men and women. Zik started feeling like a stranger in his own home. Not because he was unwanted, but because he was no longer needed. It was the most painful form of rejection. Relevance fading without confrontation. Saad wasn't punishing him. She was reminding him of her value, of her power, of her choice. And deep within Zik, a seed of doubt began to grow. Doubt not about his affair, but about whether he still deserved the woman he had once begged to marry him. Amaka believed that the only way to win a man's heart was to first tear down the woman who held it. She saw Sada's calmness as weakness, her silence as surrender. So she took it upon herself to turn up the heat. The little hints had not worked. Now it was time to play dirty. She began feeding Zik misinformation, cloaked in innocent concern. "Babe, are you sure your wife is still invested in you? You work so hard. And she's always busy doing her own thing. Some women only stick around for the lifestyle." Then she'd pause dramatically, watching his face for a flicker of confusion. When she sensed it, she pounced with sympathy and sensuality. "But don't worry, I see you. I'm here for you." She was deliberate with every touch, every moan, every "I miss you." She took photos of their intertwined hands and saved them in a hidden folder. Not for now, but for later proof leverage. At brunch with her friends, she spoke in riddles that painted her as the victorious other woman. Some women don't realize their husband has already moved on emotionally, physically, everything. Her friends giggled and nodded, feeding her ego, validating her illusion. Amaka had convinced herself that she was winning, but she didn't know she was playing chess with a queen who moved in silence. She escalated further by planting seeds of chaos in Zik's mind. One evening, she casually mentioned that she heard a certain young man, a popular philanthropist, had been seen with Saad at a fundraising gala. "You know these NGO types," she said, swirling her wine. "Always forming closeness. You never can tell what's really going on behind those handshakes and photo ops." Zik bristled. Jealousy, the emotion he felt entitled to but never expected to feel himself, crept into his chest like cold water in harmattan. He didn't ask Saad about it directly. Instead, he started watching her more closely. How she dressed, how she smiled at guests, how she laughed a little too freely. Amaka noticed the shift and smiled to herself. Her manipulation was working. She even staged a crying fit one afternoon, claiming she felt used and hidden, forcing Zik to promise he'd make things official soon. She timed her meltdowns to coincide with his lowest moments, after stressful meetings, failed tenders, or arguments with his children. She made herself seem like the only peace he had, all while sharpening her claws behind his back. But what Amaka didn't realize was that her very need to manipulate was the evidence of her inferiority. Queens don't beg to be seen. They command presence. While Amaka tried to bulldoze her way into Sada's palace, she hadn't noticed the walls weren't crumbling. They were watching. And soon, she would find out that in Lagos society, position isn't taken by beauty or ambition. It is held by legacy, class, and spirit. And Saad had all three. Zik was a man used to being in control, but lately, his world felt like it was shifting beneath his feet. At work, his decisions no longer carried the same clarity. His once laser-sharp focus dulled under the weight of emotional turmoil. He found himself missing meetings, fumbling through presentations, and snapping at staff for no reason. His once thriving construction company was still afloat, but cracks had begun to form in more than just the walls of the buildings they erected. At home, the air was too quiet. Sada's absence was louder than her presence used to be. She spoke to him respectfully, but her eyes no longer lingered on his face, and her hands no longer reached for his in the hallway. She had become a mystery again, elegant, elusive, and powerful. Even their children, once glued to his every word, now spent more time with their mother. His daughter, Tara, barely spoke to him, and his son, Junior, responded with one-word answers. Zik felt like a guest in his own home, a man who had traded diamonds for glitter and now realized he couldn't go back to the mine. One night, Zik attended a black-tie fundraiser hosted by the Lagos Philanthropy Circle. He hadn't planned to go, but he knew Saad would be there. He told himself he just wanted to support her cause, but in truth, he missed her. He missed the woman who could walk into a room and make every eye turn with quiet admiration. When Saad arrived, dressed in a shimmering Ankara gown laced with gold embroidery, the room shifted. She wasn't just beautiful, she was regal. She glided between conversations, shook hands with governors and CEOs, laughed with diplomats, and never once looked his way. Zik watched, transfixed. Then it happened. He saw her speaking with the young philanthropist Amaka had mentioned. They laughed, shared a brief but warm embrace, and posed for a photo together. Something sharp twisted in Zik's chest. For the first time, he felt like he was on the outside of a life he used to own. It wasn't just jealousy, it was regret. He realized then that while he had been busy chasing Amaka's fire, Saad had become untouchable. Not because she had moved on to another man, but because she had ascended to a level he could no longer reach. And the worst part? It was entirely his fault. Amaka had played her games, but Saad had played her silence. And the tide was turning. The unraveling began like a whisper. A rumor passed between wine glasses at elite luncheons and hushed giggles in the powder rooms of Lagos social clubs. Amaka had gone too far. Fueled by her hunger for recognition and her growing insecurity, she decided to force Zik's hand. She leaked one of their private photos, just one. It wasn't scandalous on the surface. Zik's hand resting on her thigh at a rooftop bar, both of them mid-laugh, framed like a romantic magazine shot. But the implications were thunderous. The photo hit social media on a Wednesday morning and spread like wildfire. Though no names were mentioned, the public knew. Lagos always knew. WhatsApp groups buzzed, gossip blogs posted blind items that were anything but blind, and by noon, the story had climbed to the top of the trending list. Is Zik Ifediba leaving his wife for a slay queen? Zik was furious. He confronted Amaka in her Lekki apartment, veins bulging in his neck. "You've embarrassed me," he yelled. Amaka, arms folded, simply replied, "I warned you. I'm tired of being a secret." But instead of solidifying her position, her stunt did the opposite. Clients canceled meetings with Zik. A key business deal fell through after the board expressed concern about public image. His own staff began whispering behind his back, unsure whether to pity or judge him. Back at home, Saad didn't flinch. She didn't ask him about the photo or the gossip swirling online. She didn't scream or cry. Instead, she continued with her routine, poised, calm, and glowing. But her silence this time was different. It wasn't strategic. It was final. She had always endured Zik's ambition, his flaws, even his emotional distance. But now he had brought shame to her doorstep. Their children saw the image. Tara cried in her room for 2 nights straight. Junior punched a hole in his bedroom wall. And Saad? She simply walked through it all with the grace of a woman who had already mourned her marriage. Zik tried to make amends. He bought flowers. He came home early. He canceled dinner with Amaka and even called a therapist. But the damage had been done. The public now saw him not as the noble businessman who built an empire with his devoted wife, but as another rich man caught in a scandal with a woman young enough to be his niece. Saad never asked him to leave Amaka. She didn't issue ultimatums. Instead, she quietly contacted her lawyer and made inquiries about the house. Not for divorce, but for a property separation. Zik, now drowning in both public shame and private pain, realized what he had underestimated all along. Saad wasn't staying because she couldn't leave. She was staying because she hadn't yet decided whether he was still worth the kingdom she had helped him build. Amaka stood before the full-length mirror in her tastefully decorated Lekki apartment, wrapped in a silk robe, makeup pristine, lips pursed in irritation. The photo leak hadn't gone the way she'd imagined. Instead of being celebrated as the new queen, she had become the punchline of bitter gossip. Social media called her everything from home wrecker to discount wife. Even her usual crew of Lagos slay queens began to distance themselves. Her DMs, once flooded with admiration and brand deals, had quieted. No endorsements, no invites, just silence. She scrolled through the comments under a gossip blog's post. Hundreds of women defending Saad, praising her dignity, mocking Amaka's desperation. Mistress Way no sabi strategy, one read. This one go spoil person marriage and still end up with nothing. That one stung. For the first time, Amaka started to doubt herself. She'd always believed beauty could win any war. But this wasn't just a battle of looks, it was one of legacy of soul. When she looked into the mirror now, she didn't see the glamorous seductress who once commanded attention. She saw a woman who had gambled her pride for a man who still hadn't left his wife. Her crown, if she ever wore one, was made of tinsel and envy. And slowly, it was falling apart. Meanwhile, Zik's calls became fewer. His tone turned curt. The warmth she once drew from him vanished, replaced by tension and guilt. Their steamy weekends faded into awkward silences and short conversations. One Saturday, she cooked a lavish meal and waited for hours, but Zik never showed. No call, no apology, just absence. The same kind she had created for Saad. The irony was bitter. Amaka had dreamt of taking Saada's place, but now she realized she had only inherited Saada's pain. Without the ring, the respect, or the legacy. One night, in a rare moment of vulnerability, she stared at herself and asked the question she had avoided for months. What exactly did I win? She thought she could rewrite the narrative, but all she had done was insert herself into a story that never belonged to her. In a bid to destroy another woman's home, she had lost her own sense of value. She had mistaken attention for love, seduction for strategy, and noise for victory. And now, with her status sinking and Zik slipping further away, she faced the truth. She was the side note, not the main chapter. The woman in the mirror was no longer the hottest. She was just a cautionary tale. Saad sat quietly in her study, the soft light of the desk lamp casting shadows over the neat stacks of papers she had prepared for her charity work. The mansion was silent except for the distant hum of the city outside. She had spent countless sleepless nights weighing her heart against her pride. The past months had tested every ounce of her strength. Watching her husband falter, feeling the sting of betrayal, and enduring the public whispers that never seemed to stop. But Saad had learned that true power was not about holding on tightly to something slipping away. It was about knowing when to release and when to fight. She was no longer the young woman who had begged for love or sought validation in a husband's eyes. She was a queen who understood her worth, with or without the man she once loved. The decision she made that night was clear and resolute. She would no longer be the woman waiting for Zik to choose her. She would choose herself first. The property inquiry she had quietly made would soon become more than just preparation. They would be her path to independence. But this was not a surrender. It was a transformation. Saad wasn't leaving out of bitterness or anger. She was stepping into a new chapter where her happiness and dignity would not be compromised. She sent a brief message to Zik, asking him to meet her at the family home the next morning. When he arrived, she greeted him with a calm smile and said, "Zik, we need to talk about what comes next. Not as enemies, but as people who once built something together." The weight in his eyes showed he understood. Whatever the future held, one thing was certain. Saad Efetiba was no longer the silent wife in the background. She was the woman writing her own story, one chapter at a time. Zik arrived at the mansion feeling the heavy weight of anticipation pressing down on his shoulders. He had never seen Saad like this, calm, composed, and fully in control. The woman who had once been his quiet supporter was now a force to reckon with. As they sat across from each other in the spacious living room, Zik realized how much he had taken for granted. He remembered the early days, the sacrifices she made, the late nights she stayed awake managing the household while he chased deals. The more he looked at her, the more he saw a woman who had evolved beyond his reach. A queen whose loyalty he had jeopardized with his selfishness. Sod spoke clearly and without bitterness, laying out the terms for their separation. It wasn't about punishment, she explained, but about reclaiming her dignity and independence. She told him that while she loved their children and respected their past, she could no longer live in the shadow of a broken trust. Zik listened in silence, the weight of regret heavy in his chest. For the first time, he saw the true cost of his actions, not just in his failing business deals or social standing, but in the quiet loss of the woman who had built his world. This reckoning was painful, but necessary. As they parted that evening, Zik knew that if he wanted to heal and rebuild, it would have to start with respecting the queen he once called his wife, and recognizing that some losses, no matter how painful, were the price of growth. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Sada's new apartment in Ikoyi, casting warm golden light over the minimalist decor and fresh flowers on the dining table. It was a far cry from the grandeur of the mansion she had left behind, but it felt right, intimate, authentic, and hers. Sod took a deep breath, savoring the quiet hum of independence that filled the space. This was more than a fresh address. It was a rebirth. Without the shadows of a strained marriage or whispered rumors, she could finally breathe, dream, and rebuild on her own terms. Her days quickly filled with renewed purpose. Her charity work flourished, and she rekindled friendships she had long neglected. She even enrolled in an executive leadership course, hungry to sharpen her mind and expand her influence beyond being just a wife or mother. For the first time in years, Sod felt fully alive, unburdened by the expectations of others. Meanwhile, Zik remained in the mansion, haunted by memories and a growing sense of loss. But change had begun within him as well. The reckoning with Sod had opened his eyes to the consequences of his choices. Slowly, he started attending therapy and making amends, not just with Sod, but with himself and their children. His business strategy shifted, focusing more on integrity and long-term vision rather than quick wins. He even volunteered to support Sada's charity initiatives, a gesture she accepted cautiously but appreciated nonetheless. Though their paths had diverged, an unspoken respect lingered between them, a recognition of shared history and the possibility of peace. New beginnings, they both realized, didn't always mean starting over with someone else. Sometimes, it meant rediscovering oneself and learning to walk forward alone, but stronger. Amaka's glittering world began to crumble like the fragile beads of a once perfect necklace. The social circle that had once admired her now whispered behind closed doors, labeling her as the woman who chased a man and lost herself in the process. Her carefully curated image, the glamorous mistress with endless charm, began to unravel when a scandal from her past surfaced, brought to light by a rival eager to reclaim their place in Lagos' elite social scene. The story revealed reckless choices and betrayals, damaging her reputation beyond repair. Brands dropped her without explanation. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. The lively, confident woman who had once ruled the party rooms was now often seen alone, her smile forced, her eyes shadowed with regret. Amaka was learning the hard way that beauty and seduction could open doors, but only integrity and respect kept them open. Meanwhile, the man she had fought for, Zik, was no longer interested in the drama or the flash. The fire that once drew him to Amaka had burned out, replaced by a quiet longing for stability and respect. As he watched from a distance, he realized that Amaka's fall was not just about social disgrace, but the inevitable consequence of building dreams on shaky foundations. The mistress who thought she was hot enough to take a home had lost more than a husband. She had lost herself. Amaka's story became a cautionary tale in the whispers of Lagos high society, a reminder that true power is not found in fleeting allure, but in the strength of character. She vanished from the spotlight, leaving behind lessons that Saad had already mastered long ago. A queen's throne is not given to those who chase it, but to those who deserve it. Saad stood on the stage of the grand auditorium, bathed in the warm spotlight, as applause filled the room. The annual Lagos Women's Leadership Summit had never seen a more inspiring keynote speaker. Her voice, steady and rich with conviction, told the story of resilience, not just her own, but that of countless African women breaking barriers and rewriting their destinies. As she spoke about integrity, courage, and the power of choosing oneself, eyes glistened with tears and hope. Saad had transformed from the woman overshadowed by scandal and betrayal into a symbol of strength and grace. Her charity work had blossomed into a national movement, touching thousands of lives and empowering women to rise above toxic relationships and societal expectations. Every step she took was a statement. Her worth was never defined by a man, but by her spirit and action. Backstage, several women approached her, thanking her for sharing her journey. Among them was a young woman who shyly said, "You gave me hope when I thought my marriage was over." Saad smiled, realizing that her victory wasn't just personal. It was collective. Meanwhile, news outlets began highlighting her as a leading figure in modern African leadership. Zik watched from afar, proud yet humbled, knowing that the woman he once doubted had become his greatest teacher. Amaka's name was no longer whispered. It was replaced by Sada's legacy. The wife who was hotter wasn't just about beauty. It was about depth, dignity, and the unstoppable power of a woman who chose to shine on her own terms. And as Saad left the stage that evening, she knew her story was far from over. It was just the beginning of a legacy that would inspire generations. Years later, Saad stood on the veranda of her family home, now transformed into a community center dedicated to empowering women and children across Lagos. The air was filled with laughter, the hum of life, a stark contrast to the silence that once haunted these walls. Her children played freely nearby, their faces radiant with hope and joy. Sada's journey from a betrayed wife to a revered queen was etched into every brick and every smile around her. She had built more than a home. She had created a legacy, one not of wealth or status, but of resilience, compassion, and unshakable strength. When she looked out over the horizon, she saw not just the city skyline, but the endless possibilities for those who dared to rise above adversity. Zik joined her quietly, standing beside the woman he once took for granted. He no longer saw her as just his wife, but as a leader, a mother, and a queen whose spirit could not be broken. Amaka's chapter was a fading echo, a lesson learned too late. Together, Saad and Zik had woven their past into a new future, one defined not by mistakes, but by growth and forgiveness. As the sun set over Lagos, casting golden hues over the bustling city, Saad whispered to herself and to all who would listen, "True power is not claimed through force or seduction, but earned through dignity, grace, and the courage to stand tall when the world tries to tear you down." And that was the legacy of a queen. Thanks for watching, family. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications for more stories from us. Also share this story with your loved ones. We will see you in the next video.